Lyra had learned, a long time ago, that silence in a palace was never actually quiet. There was always something underneath it. The soft footsteps of servants who had learned to move without sound. The distant clink of armor from the corridor guards. The particular hush that fell over a room when important people were pretending not to watch you. She had lived inside that hush for 6 years. She was an Omega, and in a kingdom ruled by Alphas, that meant something specific. It meant she was tolerated. It meant she was managed. It meant that when she walked into a room, certain eyes slid away from her in the practiced way of people who have decided, without discussion, that someone does not quite count. What had made her different, for 6 years, was Caelum. The Alpha King, her mate. The bond had formed the night they turned 18, snapping into place between their chests without warning, without permission, without any care for what was convenient. She had not asked for it. He had not asked for it. But she had believed in it, completely and without reservation, the way you believe in things when you are 18, and have not yet learned the cost of that. That was the mistake she would spend the rest of this story paying for. The bond was already gone by the time the real damage began. Caelum had severed it 3 weeks before, at the same altar where they had once stood together, which Lyra suspected was not accidental. There was a specific kind of cruelty that lives in symmetry. He may not have known he was being cruel. That was the part she could not decide about. She was still in the palace. This was the detail that embarrassed her most. She had nowhere to go, not immediately, not without admitting out loud what had happened, which required a version of herself she had not yet managed to locate. So she stayed, and she moved through the marble corridors like a woman who had not yet received the news about herself. And she spent her mornings in the library, because the library was the one place in the palace that had never cared who she was. The library was hers. She had spent 4 years rebuilding its archive after the previous archivist died, and no one else wanted the work. She had cross-referenced the census records, reorganized the treaty correspondence, created a system that the palace had been benefiting from for years, without quite noticing it was there. This was, she would later understand, the pattern of her entire life at court. She was useful in ways that were invisible until they stopped. The woman who had replaced her, not in the bond, because bonds do not work that way, but in the corridor, in the dining hall, in the east wing, where Lyra's things had once been, was named Serafine. Lyra saw her for the first time on a Tuesday, which felt wrong. Important things should not happen on Tuesdays. Serafine was tall. She was Alpha-born, from a powerful border family that Caelum's kingdom had been courting for nearly 2 decades. She carried herself the way all strong Alphas did, like space had been arranged for her in advance, like rooms simply accommodated her without needing to be asked. She did not look at Lyra. This was more humiliating than contempt would have been. Contempt required acknowledgement. This was something else entirely. The specific blindness of a person who has been told, by every structure around her, that there is nothing in that direction worth seeing. Lyra went back to the library. She read the same page of the same book for 40 minutes. She noticed this on the 41st minute and put the book down. A young archivist named Dessa brought her tea. Dessa was 16, and relentlessly kind in the way that young people are kind when they have not yet learned that kindness in a court can cost you. She set the cup down without comment, pretending not to notice that Lyra's hands were not completely steady. Lyra did not thank her. She was not sure she could do it without her voice betraying her. She thought Dessa understood. 3 weeks of grief. Then, quietly, something else arrived. It did not announce itself. That was not how anger worked. Not the real kind. The kind that was not hot and loud, but cold and very clear. It arrived the way winter arrived, gradually, and then completely, and you realized at some point that the temperature had changed, and you had simply not noticed the exact moment it happened. She found the letters on a Thursday morning, at the back of a cedar chest in the archive's lower level, underneath a box of outdated census records from the Eastern Territories. They were correspondence between Caelum's father, the old king, dead 7 years, and the border family that had produced Serafine. They spanned nearly a decade. The arrangement, written out in careful formal language that was somehow more terrible for being careful, had not been improvised. It had been planned before the mate bond ever formed, perhaps before she and Caelum had been adults. She was a problem that had been anticipated. The bond had been an inconvenience they had always intended to resolve. She sat with this information for a long time. The archive was very quiet around her. Dust moved in the light from the high window. She read the letters twice, then a third time, and then she put them aside and sat still for a while, not thinking, just letting the information settle into her the way cold water settles into stone. She did not cry. She had decided, weeks ago, that she was finished crying in this palace. She packed that night, efficiently, which surprised her. She had always imagined, in the abstract way you imagine disasters before they happen, that packing to leave your life would take a long time. It did not. She took her research. She took her books. She took the letters. She took nothing that had been given to her by the crown. She left before dawn. The East Gate guard rotation was thinner on Friday mornings. She had learned the pattern 2 years ago, and could not remember why. And she was through it, and on the road before the sun was fully up. She did not look back. She would have complicated feelings about this later. At the time, it simply felt like moving. Her mother, Wren, met her at the door of the family home in the Eastern Territories, and looked at her face, and said nothing useful or necessary, except, "You will sleep first." Lyra slept for 14 hours. It was the first full night she had had since the severance. The Eastern pack was small, 40 wolves, a handful of extended family units, a quiet reputation for being unremarkable that had served as protection for generations. They were not political. They had no interest in being political. This was the most beautiful thing about them. She started working almost immediately, because this was how she functioned and had always functioned. She reorganized the village land records, which had been in gentle chaos since the old record keeper retired. She taught the reading circle on Thursdays. She helped the healers sort the medicine inventory, which had not been properly cataloged in years. She built something, small, but hers, built with her own hands and her own system and her own choices, which turned out to feel different from things that had simply been assigned to her. The difference was harder to name than she had expected, but it was real. 5 months passed. Then word began arriving in fragments, the way bad news always does, in pieces, from different directions, assembling itself slowly into a shape she recognized. The palace trade route to the eastern region had deteriorated. A border dispute with a northern settlement had dragged on for weeks without resolution. There were administrative delays in the census work, small failures, accumulating. Dessa's letter arrived with careful language and half-finished sentences that said, between every line, something is wrong, and people are beginning to understand what was lost. Lyra put the letter in a drawer and went to teach the reading circle. Caelum came in autumn. He said he was there about the trade relationship. He had sent no word in advance, which was either arrogance or anxiety. She could not decide which. She was carrying an armload of land records out of the record house when she saw him standing at the village gate. He looked like himself. She was not sure what she had expected. She said, without inflection, "Your Majesty, you should have sent word." He stayed 3 days. They talked about the trade routes, and the census overlap, and the border dispute, and the archive organization system. They talked about everything except what they were both aware of sitting between them, which was every conversation they had not had in 6 years, and the letters, and the specific weight of what it meant that he was here. On the second evening, everyone else had gone to dinner, and neither of them had moved, and they were alone in the record house with the lamp burning low. He said, "You look well." She said, "I am." He said, "I did not," and stopped. She waited. She had gotten very good at not filling his silences. He did not finish the sentence. She had known he would not. Some sentences are started because a person needs to believe they were willing to say it, not because they are actually ready to. She said, "I have something you need to see." She put the letters on the table between them. He read them slowly. She watched him read. This took a long time, and the room was very quiet, and when he was finished, he was completely still in the way of a person who has just discovered that a significant portion of their understanding of their own life was constructed by someone else. He said, finally, "How long have you had these?" She told him. He nodded. He did not ask why she had waited, and she was grateful for that, because the reason was not something she wanted to say out loud. that bringing them to him sooner would have looked like a bid to reclaim him, and she needed, still needed, whatever she did next to be done cleanly, from choice. He said, "What do you want me to do?" She said, "That is not for me to answer." He returned to the capital. She went back to the reading circle, and the land records, and the healer's inventory. Winter arrived properly. She learned to make the Eastern bread that her mother's family had been making for 3 generations. She wrote to Dessa about the archive system, and did not write to Caelum. His first letter arrived 6 weeks later. It was long and careful, and said, at the center of many words, "Come back." She wrote back 2 words, "No, Lyra." He came in person in early spring. No ceremony. 2 guards at the gate who stayed there. He walked to the record house and sat across from her and said, "I have been thinking about the 6 years." She put her pen down. He said, "The archive, the Eastern relationships, the 17 things I did not know you were doing until they stopped getting done." He paused. "I know it is not the point. I know it is not enough. I needed you to know that I know." She looked at him for a moment. She said, "What are you asking me for?" He said, "I want you to come home." She said, "The palace was never my home. You watched me not be home there for 6 years. You saw it. You just did not decide that it mattered until it became inconvenient for you." He did not answer. There was no answer for this. She had not said it to wound him, or not only that. She had said it because it was true, and the truth had been patient long enough. He came a 3rd time in late summer, without any stated reason. He sat in the village square while she ran the reading circle. She saw him through the window, drinking tea that Dessa's young cousin had brought him, because Dessa's cousin was 16 and had no idea that good sense should have intervened. He sat with the tea and watched the children without expression. After the circle ended and the children went home, she came outside and sat across from him. He said, "I am not here to ask you again." She said, "All right." He said, "I just wanted to be where you are. For a few hours. I know I do not have the right to that." She looked at him for a long time. The square was quiet. A dog walked across the far end of it without hurry. She said, "An hour, and you are helping me carry those records back, because my back has been doing something I do not like." He carried the records. He did not say anything important while he carried them. She did not require him to. This is not a story that ends with a grand return. She did not go back to the palace. She made this decision the way she had learned to make decisions, slowly, and on her own terms, and without apology for the slowness. She visited the capital twice that year, long enough both times to confirm what she already knew, that she did not want to live there, that this knowledge was not a wound, but a clarity, and that clarity, when you had earned it the hard way, felt like something worth keeping. The letters were made public. Caelum did this himself, without her asking, which was the most honest thing she had ever seen him do. The political aftermath was significant, and lasted a long time. She followed it from a distance, with the detached interest of a person reading history about a place they once lived. What had been severed could not be rebuilt. That was simply true. The bond was gone and did not return, and she stopped waiting for it to return. And then one day, she realized she had stopped thinking about it entirely, which was a different kind of ending than the one she had expected but was, she decided, good enough. What grew instead was smaller and more difficult, and had to be chosen, every day, deliberately. It grew in letters that got less careful over time. It grew in visits to the Eastern territories that the village eventually stopped being surprised by. It grew in a record house in a small pack village where a man who had once been very certain about the shape of his own life learned to sit quietly and carry things and drink tea that a star-struck 16-year-old made for him, and be grateful for it. The last moment is this. Lyra in the archive, early morning, the light coming through the high window the way it always did, Caelum in the doorway. Dessa's voice from somewhere deeper in the building asking if anyone wanted tea. Lyra said yes. She moved her papers to one side without looking up. He sat down.